South Korea is a country with one of the most densely populated urban areas, but it's also in a complete demographic crisis and one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, with a crashing population, and there aren't enough kids in schools, so they're closing schools left and right. But at the same time, in the South Korean market, a hot and booming sector is the pet sector. There are tons of people here who are choosing to raise dogs instead of children. So I figured I'd take the time to talk to y'all today about what it's like to raise a dog in South Korea. Today I'm in the park with Charlie, my dog. Woohoo! Hi, Charlie! Yeah. We're gonna go get Charlie a haircut because she's obviously very fluffy nowadays. So we're gonna walk through the park over towards where the groomer is. So my dog, she's almost 5. She's total puppy. She's not that big. She's about 13.3 kilograms. If she's on her hind legs, she comes just about to my waist, so she's not too big of a dog. But in South Korea, it's pretty common not to have big dogs. One of the biggest differences between dog culture in the United States and Korea, or at least Seoul, would be the size of dogs, right? So everybody here has really small dogs. There are some people here who are really into big dogs, but most people, they prefer small dogs. And Charlie, who is about to find a spot to do her thing, see? Charlie actually does not qualify, in my mind, as a big dog, but in South Korea, a lot of people think of her as a very large dog. So technically she's medium-sized, I guess, and like, you know, like people who are into dog shows, and there's this like whole categorization of dogs based on their size, weight class, blah, blah, blah. She's a Bedlington Terrier. In the US, she's technically qualified as a small-sized dog, but here she's qualified as a medium-sized dog. So there's a bit of a different standard in people's minds. Most people have lap dogs. Usually they're tiny Maltese, you know, white dogs. Koreans tend to prefer dogs that do not shed, and many people carry them around, and there's just a total different culture around it. One thing that you often see related to the size of dogs is that it's really hard sometimes to find the appropriate sized product for your dog. So right now, my dog, she's wearing a little harness here because sometimes she gets really excited in the park and wants to bolt, and if it's just a neck leash, then it kind of is not good for her throat. So she's wearing a harness, but it was kind of difficult to find exactly the right size harness because there's usually good small ones for little dogs, and then on occasion for the rare people who like really big dogs, there's some really big ones, but that awkward in-between size of a medium-sized dog is not exactly easy to find all the time. Another thing that often happens when you have a slightly larger dog is that people will tend to take their dogs to the shopping mall, and when they have tiny dogs, they just carry them around. But most shopping malls or places like that will actually put a limit as to the size of the dog that is acceptable for the building, and that's usually based on weight. Often actually happens with, you know, airplanes or whatever. When you travel internationally with your dog, airplanes can only have, you know, dogs that are usually under 12 kilograms to be put in a seat section. Otherwise they have to go in the underbelly of the plane, blah, blah, blah. And they use that standard here for buildings. So when you go to a shopping mall, your dog has to be like under 12 kilograms. There's often many situations like that. It's not always the case, but yeah. So my dog, she's 13.3, so she'd have to go on a major diet in order to be able to go to those places. So yeah, there's definitely different size standards here. Also, that means that people often react differently to Charlie. So when I tell people that I have a dog, they're like, oh great, I'll be totally fine, I love dogs, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, I tell her she's a little bit bigger than other dogs, tell them the size, I tell them the weight, and how far she comes up when she like jumps up on you, and still they think it's okay, but then when they actually see the dog, because many people don't have exposure to larger sized dogs, their expectations and their imagination of the situation and the reality of the situation are quite different, and they find themselves a little bit overwhelmed by the size. So whereas that's never the case when I'm talking to people from the United States or from European countries or what, they don't find her size to be overwhelming in any way. But yeah, there's even a way that people refer to large dogs here where they give people a sense of overwhelm. There's like a phrase for that in the Korean language. They call it 위화감. So yeah, you kind of have to just be aware that not everybody's going to be happy about your dog if your dog is not a lap dog. Another big difference with dog culture here is that people tend to personify their dogs and perceive their dogs as humans. Personally, I don't agree with that. I think that's kind of problematic because a dog has different psychological and instinctual needs as an animal that are different than a human does. And communication and language for a dog is fundamentally different. But I guess just because of how things are going here with, low population, people want to be having dogs instead of kids, and then they still want to like buy things for their dogs and they want to dress them up. And there's this whole culture around dressing up your dogs. It's a lot more common here than it is in the United States. So that's a pretty significant difference, but it doesn't stop there. It actually extends to a deeper psychological level. So in the Korean language, people will often use familial terms to refer to their relationship with their canine. In English, you would rarely ever see someone, sometimes we use phrases in English like dog dad or doggy mama or things like this, right? But it's not super common to see people look at their dog and say, come to mommy, or come to daddy, right? Or refer to their dog as baby or child. Maybe they'll refer to themselves in relationship to their animal as older brother or older sister. That's not a very common thing to see in an English language speaking culture. But that's kind of the baseline for how people interact with dogs here, which in a way is really cool because it means that they're integrating them into their family. But in another way, it's a little bit problematic because the dog is not a human and doesn't function in the same way psychologically as people do. So I guess since dog culture is relatively new in a way, then what happens is people have human expectations for a canine, which is not that great. So they expect like, oh, if you explain to the dog, then maybe the dog will kind of like, better understand you. Or if you treat the dog like really, really nicely, then eventually the dog will do it. But that's not really how canine psychology works, right? So there's sometimes these misinterpretations that can happen. Yeah, so it's a different starting point. Viewing the dog less as an animal and more as a family member on a deep psychological level. And I know that many Americans view their dogs as family members. I view my lovely Charlie here as a family member, but I do not view her in any way like a person. Another big difference, actually this is pretty much the same big difference as what I've been talking about already. Another sort of shocking part of Korean dog culture for me, and actually this is the same in Japan from my experience of going there, is because people have small dogs, and with population growth just like not happening, people aren't having kids, and various economic reasons for like raising kids is too expensive, and so instead people will have dogs, and then they sort of express their familial needs towards their dogs and treat their dogs like babies and children, and like there's this whole context, right? But on top of that, like infrastructurally, there's also this thing where because people don't have big dogs, they're used to taking small dogs around here and there. They're used to bringing them into like big cities because obviously South Korea and places like Japan are highly their populations are highly packed into dense urban areas rather than having like half their population in the countryside or something like that, which is what you would see in the United States. So because they're densely urban and they function on that basis, then that's sort of a natural, I guess, occurrence is that people wind up putting their dogs in baby carriages. So when you're walking around the city, sometimes you'll see, a young man and a woman, in their like early 30s or something like that, and they're pushing a baby carriage, like a stroller, and you assume to yourself, oh, well, they probably have a baby in there, because naturally, psychologically, that's what you're used to assuming from a few steps away. So you're like walking around the corner, you're gonna see like what their baby looks like and see if their baby's cute, and if you couldn't coo at their baby and be like, ooh, 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 like people do, and you turn around and there's a dog, right? And you're like, wait, did they move their baby and put the dog there for a second? Or, oh wait, they don't have a baby, they just have the dog and they're using the baby carriage for the dog. But this is a very common occurrence. You see it happen a lot. And there's even a market here just for doggy carriages, I guess. And products that go all along with that. So it's just it's a completely different situation. Different culture, different society, different economy, different infrastructure, and you wind up with these kind of daily assumptions that you have about lifestyle that become completely broken and torn apart. There are definitely tons more differences in dog culture, pet culture, etc., etc. But that's all the time we have for today because I have to get her fur cut. It's too long. So hope y'all will tune in next time on the Tyler Take. Bye-bye. Say bye-bye. Say bye-bye. Say bye-bye. Yeah.